So, as we look at section two of Jonas's essay, there's really two major points, I think, that he wants to make, or two implications for ethics of the changed condition of human beings. And again, that the crucial point is, yes, human beings have always had technology. That is part of the point of his quoting the chorus from the Antigone. But that power of that technology has grown so much, basically in the 20th century, or after the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution, that change in power has created a qualitative change, he thinks, in or demanded a qualitative change in human ethics. And that really has to do with the power of technology. And again, the 2 points really are that power has changed in two ways. One is that we are finally at the point where the power of our technology in space has meant that a traditional boundary between the human world, which he embodies in the idea of the city, and nature has been broken down. I tried to boil it up or boil it down here, that the city, which is short for civilization, the place in which human beings have laws and customs and morality, is one place, and it's divided from nature where there's no ethical dimension. And that is because human beings do not need to take responsibility for what they do to nature, because what they do to nature is superficial and not lasting. But that has changed. That is, human beings now have the power to change nature in a fundamental way, to affect nature. And that, to Jonas, means that they need to take responsibility for non-human nature. That's a huge point that he's making here. And perhaps not the most, but not the most relevant for us. That is, it's a huge point in terms of how we should be living our lives and living in the world of where we're actually feeling the effects of global warming. We all know this to be true. Jonas was exactly right. And in a certain respect, it's the issue that divides us in the modern world. That is, there are those people who acknowledge that we have affected nature basically through greenhouse gas emissions in a radical way, and now we are dealing with the effects. And those people who, either I would say mindlessly deny that it's going on, or who stick their head in the sand and don't want to think about it. I mean, which is very understandable, I think. But it's a huge issue, obviously, right? Jonas meant it in a more comprehensive sense in this essay, that it wasn't just for our own survival that we needed to take an ethical approach to nature. That is, this thing that was unprecedented, at least in terms of his thought, in human history, where human beings had to actually treat non-human nature as a moral subject because they need to take responsibility for their deep and lasting effects on nature, which is a totally new thing. That is a huge, huge part of this essay. But again, not exactly what's most relevant for us. What's most relevant for us, I think, is embodied in this quote from the essay, that the very inconstancy of human fortunes assures the constancy of the human condition. And that brings us to the second implication of the new power of human technology, and that is that it doesn't just have effects in space. It has effects in time that are much more profound than ever before. He describes the realm of ethics as really dealing, as he says, with the here and now, traditional ethics. This is the quote here: "The good and evil about which action had to care lay close to the act, either in the praxis itself or in its immediate reach. and were not a matter for remote planning. That is, the effects of our action, he's thinking really of effects of our technological action and all of our actions, were so limited in time that we didn't really need to take much responsibility beyond the here and now, because the effects of our actions were so weak that they didn't affect things for very long. As he says, the effective range of action was small. The time span of foresight, goal setting, and accountability was short. Control of circumstances limited. Again, remember, he's describing the condition of human beings in the pre-modern world here. Proper conduct had its immediate criteria and almost immediate consummation. The long run of consequences beyond was left to chance, fate, or providence. Ethics, accordingly, was of the here and now. And this makes total sense if the effects of our actions are limited in time, that we would have an ethics of the here and now. And he then does a quick survey of the kind of maxims, he says, that were, the result of that. Christian ethics, Aristotelian ethics, utilitarian ethics, Kantian ethics. He says, note in all these maxims, the agent and the other of his actions are share of a common present. That is, all of these ethical approaches, including the two that we've looked at, utilitarianism and Kantianism, presuppose that the effects of our actions are not really long-lasting, that the immediate effects, the things we have to deal with, are in the here and now, which of course is still true, that ethics is dominantly a matter of how human beings treat each other in the here and now, and that's the entire scope. But the point he wants to make is that's no longer true, and it's no longer responsible just to have an ethics of the here and now. Why? Because, and again, we're excluding the effects here on the non-human world for the moment, and thinking of the effects of our action on ourselves, on other human beings, that it's no longer true that the good and evil about which action has to care lays close to the act. That is, we know that the decisions that we make will have long-lasting, if not permanent, effects on the way that human beings live in the future. Let's say something we're familiar with in the class, the issue of autopilot, of self-driving cars. That is, the kinds of decisions we make about the programming of those cars will affect human beings, the way that they live, the nature of their world, in this very long-lasting way. And looked at in a slightly different way, the act of handing over in a certain sense, the moral decision-making of how you operate your car to an artificial intelligence, that considered as an historical moment, is of incredible importance. That is, if we begin to relinquish the human control of ethical decision-making to autonomous systems, to algorithms, basically, that may be a fateful step in the very history of humankind forever. So I think that is that aspect of it. Jonas saying, listen, the kinds of public policy decisions that human beings make now in terms of how they employ their technology, and this would, of course, include, and most relevant for us, be computer technology, digital technology, that the decisions we make now are not limited in time. They're not limited in their effects. It's not an ethics of the here and now. We simply must take into account the long-term effects of our actions. It's not like our ancestors, where what they did would only have ramifications for a very short time. Again, that's true for most of our private ethical actions, but in the sphere of public policy, deciding on things like, self-driving cars, or things like entering into an age where the internet has such incredible power or influence over us, or even something like social media with Facebook, that these are very fateful decisions in a way that they weren't before. And in a certain sense, the whole class, as I'm teaching it, is really an exploration of that in a certain area, digital technology, computers. What sort of new situation are we in when things like the kind of issues that we're exploring in this class, for instance, the implications of the kind of digital surveillance that's happening all over the world, or in a more speculative way, the question of the singularity, which we're exploring, which is maybe the most, the most controversial, because in terms of practical technological issues of whether we can actually create a true artificial intelligence. There are many who think that that's a fairy tale, but I think it's at least worth exploring. And it certainly would be the most important thing. That is, as writers about the singularity who do take it seriously say, that the creation of a true artificial intelligence will be the most important moment in the history of the species, because it will change human life fundamentally forever. That these are the kind of issues, I think, which are congenial to the Jonas thesis, as I'm calling it. That is, that we need, he says, to develop an entirely new ethical outlook, at the very least, in order to deal with this new situation. And just to lead us into the next section, section 3, the sort of next step in the argument is the new importance of knowledge. He says it follows that the knowledge that is required to assure the morality of action fitted these limited terms. That is, in the past, the question of knowledge was not at the forefront, but now it is. That is that the importance of knowledge, and I really think he's thinking of the importance of our knowledge of what the effects of our actions will be, because the effects are so broad, so long-lasting, and so deep, both in terms of the natural world and the human world, that responsible action in the modern world, when it comes to these big public policy decisions about what we do with our technology, that it would be entirely irresponsible were we not to have a grip on what the actual consequences. And this, of course, does lead us into a kind of a utilitarian way of thinking about it, a consequentialist way of thinking about it, that responsible action depends upon having some grasp of the consequences of those actions. And we are entering entirely new territory in terms of the fatefulness of those consequences.